Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
It's great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Well, good. We're going to talk about bubbles, and not the kind that kids play with, the bubbles that adults play with, the ones that the politicians play with, and social engineering. There are a lot of bubbles out there because once the government makes a decision to do something, they tend to distort it or have excesses, and it's well known. History is replete with all the major bubbles that have existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And of course, there's a lot going on now in the financial community that we claim represents a bubble. And we've talked about that, but Chris, we're not going to talk so much about that today because I think a lot of our viewers know exactly what a financial bubble is. I don't think it should be difficult to make the case for a financial bubble in the stocks and the bond market when you look at deficits that are being monetized to the tune of trillions of dollars. I mean, it's always been bad because they were planting the seeds of the destruction of the currency and runaway bubble and the bursting of an economic bubble. But it's big, and there's a lot of ramifications that will come because the bubble will burst. I've made the point all along that we're not going to automatically see a change with the change in the Congress. The Congress changes all the time. It's one reason why I grew cool to the idea of term limits. I've supported that, thinking that's better than nothing, but it really isn't the answer, because if the new people participate in the bubble formation, the monetary system, endorse debt and all these other things, it just continues to go and go. But those bubbles are out there. But we don't want to concentrate on that because we have, even though we think it's very, very serious, and it's going to be felt by just about everybody except a few of the criminals that are able to take what they've earned, what they've stolen, and escape with it. But I want to talk about another bubble. It's sort of the social and cultural bubble that goes on, the beliefs that are going on. And when I wrote a little booklet a year or so ago, I talked about bankruptcy, and I talked a lot about the financial bankruptcy, but also talked about the moral bankruptcy. And that's more or less what we're going to talk about today, the moral bankruptcy that allows our country and our people to go along with such extreme measures, and they become practical and necessary, and there's no way out, so they continue to do it. One thing is one thing that is acceptable in a society like this is the people put up with a lot of fibbing and distortion, and some people call it lying, what the government does. And of course, in war times, we're lied to about the necessity to go any place in the world, even though we have not had an attack on us, because of a danger to our national security. And the people accept it because they become frightened. So, but this can become epidemic, and the government uses that tool for a lot of things, in economic things. I think there is a bubble in the concern about the results of and the consequences of COVID. And we recognize that it's a very serious thing. We have to do something about it, and common sense should take care of it. But all of a sudden, it's used by what we see as a distortion out of ignorance. Maybe people don't understand what's going on, and for the reaction that some want for their own particular reason, they have to put fear into the people. And if anybody would look carefully, Chris, I think they would see there's a lot of fear out there, and the fear gets worse. If fear drives economic support through the government welfare system, taken from one and given to another, you can see this is a disaster. So the financial crisis has contributed to this fear-mongering, and people are very, very fearful, but it's not like it's an irrational fear. But it's important that people try to figure out, is it because, should they be fearful because of the free enterprise system, and therefore we have to get rid of it and usher in socialism? So that's why fear is a consequence of many elements, and one element I think is important is fear that has been generated by government policy. So if the government has created the business cycle, which is a very important thing, and it's used to just continue to do the things that have not been the right thing to do. So you come along with a real crisis, a potential crisis, in health matters. But there's many people now are saying, the reaction to COVID has been much worse than COVID itself. And all of a sudden you can read statistics about kids don't get it. And when you take a percentage of people who die from it, it's much less than people think. But still, to keep this scenario going, the fear has to continue. And this invites the politicians and the bureaucrats and those who have taken a certain position to continue to do what they think is necessary, and that is keep this fear-mongering going, which motivates people to accept things that they shouldn't accept, because that I think is what's happening now. Is people in many ways have become very complacent when it comes to the responsibility of protecting liberty. And I'm sure we can mention quite a few places where that is happening, but this thing gets going and it feeds on itself until it dominates. And that's when I think you get into a bubble. I think in some ways the distortions by our bureaucrats and our government is that the distortions are in a big bubble. You don't know whom to believe and how long it's going to last, and then it gets pretty serious, because all of a sudden everybody knows there's a lot of lying going on there, a lot of fibbing. So we need an arbitrator. We need somebody to watch that language, because somebody might distort something along their lines. And if they have the power, all of a sudden they might come and decide that, yes, we have to get more obedience to telling the truth. And Chris, I think that's where we are today. We're messed up and we need to sort it out. And I think it's equally as important, and some people believe it's more important, that this cultural and moral bubble distortion that we have is every bit as important as the distortion that originates from the Federal Reserve.
That's right, Dr. Paul. We are living in a big government bubble. And under that umbrella, like you mentioned, you have the financial and economic, but also the social that is part of it. And towards the end of all bubbles, you get what is called a blow-off top, or what Mises called the crack-up boom, where things go very far, very fast, and it's unsustainable, because this is the exact opposite of how all of life works. Life is cyclical. Anyone who follows the financial markets knows that stocks go up one day, down, up and down. If you track your weight, you'll gain a pound here and lose a half a pound. Your emotions, you're happy and then sad over and over. It's cyclical. And even in sports, you'll win 7 games and lose 5. So that's how life is. But when you have government, the Fed, and all the politicians, they inject this artificiality. They tilt the tables, and things go in one direction relentlessly, like the government debt, like the size of government, and it just never corrects itself. This is artificial, and it eventually must collapse, because there's nothing solid underneath it. So there's the bad news, where it's difficult to live in situations like this, but there is also the good news that it will collapse because it is totally unsustainable.
Yeah, I think no matter how bad it gets, and it's gotten bad many times throughout history, and there's always some source. Matter of fact, when it gets extremely bad, there's a strong belief, which I share, that there will always be a remnant. Whether it's a religious type of remnant that remains, or a remnant of individuals believing in liberty and the market economy and sound money. But the big problem is sorting it all out, because in this age of information, everybody has so much information. The control of information is a big deal. And not only can the distortions be spread around, the sorting it out and finding out who's telling the truth, who isn't, that's a different story. That is a big job, and everybody gets to noticing it now. And the big argument today is, what do you read on the internet, and how are we going to stop this, and why are people being censored? Why are they locking people off? Do they have a right to do this? And it raises a lot of questions. And people are now very frightened about it, but now we're coming up with censorship. And there is censorship going out there, but unfortunately, I don't think everybody trusts the censors. You know, who's going to censor and monitor the censors? And that is a big problem, because now you hear about this. Oh, it was on X and Y internet service and platform, and well, we were going to protect that. We're going to protect the people's right to talk about it. Then all of a sudden we find out that some of this distribution of information, in the old days it was meant that newspapers weren't supposed to be controlled by the government. But I think in the modern age, in the age of information and computers and websites and all, I think they're close to government, much closer than people believe, and therefore people get confused about it. Oh, well, if they're a private company, they can do anything they want. But what if they're not truly private? What if they're doing the service of the government? And what if the censor is doing it in collusion with the government? It raises a lot of questions. So the only way I can see this is censor, you know, the need for this and the problem here is a consequence of a society that has rejected it. So it's back to the point of when the individuals and a collective number of, you know, the people are aware of a moral society, and we were warned at the time of our Constitution that this system that they devise can't work if you don't have a moral people. And when you look around today, I think there's a real question, how moral are the people? And yet on the other hand, when I look at it, I say, that is absolutely true. It's hard, but it seems like the people who run the show are in this category of passing out the misinformation, because I've been around a couple years. I've been involved in medicine and politics and community activities. I have met a lot of people. And, you know, I still come out saying, most of the people I've met throughout my life have been pretty nice people, and they're moral. But that's compatible with the system, because the immoral, the people who dwell on being authoritarian, they want more power, they always move toward the government. So the worst rise to the top, which Hayek warned us about. They get in and they control things, and then the people are out there trying to survive with this. But it still is up to the people. The people have to wake up and reject it and know and understand how this system works, because they're the only ones that can resist it. You're not going to see a new Congress next year, you know, give us a libertarian society. And you're not going to see the censors all of a sudden protecting the First Amendment. It's not going to happen. The people have to change, and that's where the big challenge is. But I think is when you see it that way, people shouldn't feel hopeless, because quite frankly, if that is true, and it's been true, that there are people you can reach, but it might be slow treading. But then also sometimes there's suddenly some positive things happening. You know, even in the threats that lockdown has presented, the threats of our civil liberties, the threat of property rights and speaking out and all these things. But there are some states that have really abused the power, and they're feeling the consequence. Sometimes you even find out that the leaders in these individual states that have been passing all these laws are not only confused on what liberty is all about, they're confused on what honesty is all about, and end up you know, distorting and stealing and doing all the things. But the people will have to wake up and doing it. The people, most importantly, can't continue to lie to themselves and say, the government's there to help me, they'll take care of me. If they need soldiers in who knows where, and we're going to protect our liberties, we must do it, we must be. And believe me, I sensed that when I was, you know, in my late teens and early. I said, yeah, this is a mess, I don't want to do this, but how else can you do it? You know, the resistance is so difficult to do it. But the big thing is, I think people talk to themselves and say, well, they're in authority, it's proper, we have to do what they say, and they're convinced not only that it's morally right, but that it's necessary. They get the distortion about economic policy. They think deficits, You can't exist without these huge deficits. You can't exist without the printing press money. And you can't exist without having your military in 150 countries around the world. And you can't tolerate this unless you have deficits that are exploding. Well, the people cannot continue to deceive themselves. Don't lie to ourselves is an important function.
Right, Dr. Paul. And you know, as we're talking about bubbles, there are a lot of people, and they even write to us, you know, they're not satisfied with just knowing that it will end, that it's going to pop. They want to know how, when. Give me a time and a date. And I wish I could, or you could, but it's impossible. You know, you're thinking like a central planner when you ask questions like that. You want to know every single detail about how the future is going to happen. And it's impossible for central planners, and it's impossible for you and me and everyone else, because life is infinitely complex and we can't know all of the variables. The best we can do is learn the principles, the truth, the economic laws. And from there, you could get some comfort to know that something is not going to last. You know, during that GameStop mania that happened, people in our, you know, free market camp were looking at that and saying, ooh, that's going to come back really hard. And they didn't say, well, this is going to happen and this person's going to do this and this is going to happen. But it did come down very hard. And then you can look back and say, okay, this is what happened. You know, so we tend to want certainty on how every single move is going to be made, but it's just not possible. The best we can do is learn the principles, share the principles with others so that they can see that something is wrong. And then there's some comfort in knowing that it will come to an end.
Very good. And you know, one thing, what happens when a process is in motion like what we have, things don't go well, then they're going to get a lot worse. You know, and people get poorer. We've talked about this as long as I've been talking about it. And that is the middle class is getting wiped out. And that's not my opinion. Matter of fact, I happen to have gained that opinion by reading and studying Austrian economics, that when you do the distortion of the monetary system and all this government intervention, it's a failed system. It ends up in a terrible situation, such as what Venezuela and many other countries have found out, and even our own country has gone through this. So they get that, we get the bad results, and people have been conditioned that they have a right to things. They get mixed up on what rights are. Well, I have a right to this, I have a right to this, and it's a sort of the nobleness of this, and what are they supposed to do? Well, they've been taught from our public school system the government's responsible for this. Even now, it's endless. And this is one that is shared by, you know, both political parties, that we have obligations. They argue about some of the details, but the one great distortion that I consider one of the, if not the greatest political issue, and that is the distortion of wealth distribution. And in that sense, and what's going on is justified. It's terrible what's happening when you can get, you know, a couple hundred people having the wealth of maybe 150 countries. There's a gross distortion of it, and it's not caused by freedom. It's not caused by, you know, honest people making a living and providing services for people. It's a result of the system. The middle class does get wiped out, and they're being wiped out, and guess what follows that? People get very frightened and scared. Once again, more that we need. But what it does next, it creates hate. Hatred, because people who disagree on what to do and who gets the money first. Right now there's a big argument, who gets the vaccine first? You know, if you lived in a free society, it would be available. I remember when the vaccine came out for polio in the 1950s, and I was old enough to remember this, but I can't recall any of this thing about fighting over who gets the vaccine first. All I remember is the voluntarism that people went around, my mother going around collecting dimes, you know, to help finance the research. But no, right now it's demands, and then it turns into hatred. And I wouldn't have to sit here and list the things because it has infiltrated so much, especially the political system. It's motivated by hate, and sometimes it's created way out of thin air. Sometimes it's pseudo related, you know, to the economic system. And when that happens, like if it's due to the economic system, that one group gets all the wealth and the other ones get crumbs, you have to figure out why. Is it because you didn't have enough government? Or is it because the government has abused their power, and to demand more government and more spending is just asking for more trouble? And I think the distinction there is crucial if we want to ever pull ourselves out of this mess.
Very good, Dr. Paul. I will finish up by saying that, we're all living in trends that began long before any of us were born. We weren't around in the late 1800s, early 1900s when these trends were put into place. And the false ideas that were cemented in then revolved around two things. One, humans are perfectible. They can be made perfect. And two, government is the vehicle and the tool that will make them perfect. And both of those are horrendously wrong. We are not meant to be perfect. We can't be. Every single move that we make is in reaction to the imperfect. If you're thirsty, you go get some water. If your baby's crying, you feed it. You get a flat tire, you go to the mechanic. All day long, we're dealing with imperfections and problems. So dissatisfaction is a critical part of human life, and you cannot eliminate it and make this frozen state of perfection, which is what these misinformed people are after. And to think that government, of all people, politicians, are the vehicle to bring about this fake perfection or this fantasy perfection is just wrong. And this was contrary to what Americans founders believed. They believed that we were all individuals who are here to pursue our own happiness as long as you don't harm others. And the role of government is to protect our liberty, and that's it. We'd be very wise to ditch these bad ideas of human perfectibility via government and go back to what the founders believed.
Very, very good, Chris. I want to just close with talking about something I've mentioned before, but it's very real, and it's very dangerous if the trend continues. And that's the thing called corporatism. That is the combination of big business and government. And Mises talked about it, and he convinced it was a very, very dangerous thing because it's corporate power, individuals who want control the economy and make all the money, along with the government that has all the guns and the power to dictate. And this is something that has come about, more so now. And but Mises's, his conclusion was, and I agree with this, because the trend has been in a certain direction, because we started noticing the combination of business and government. Not just this last 10 years or 5 years, but it's always been there, but it's gotten much worse with the downturn of the economy, the mixture of government and banking and the Federal Reserve and financing. That's been around, but especially with the crisis that we're facing now that's related, to COVID, and also the political crisis with all the arguing and the innuendos that have no substantiation. That is, the big problem. But the corporatism is running rampant now because, in a free society, to organize as a corporation isn't illegal, but they don't get the rights to control and combine and get the benefits from government. So I would say there's a lot of corporatism involved in social media. I would say that there's a lot of corporatism, government and business together, in the military-industrial complex. But almost everything now, there's a combination. In medicine, there's a medical-industrial complex. There's an educational government complex. It's government mixing things up that shouldn't even be in the hands of the government. We learned at one time, a long time ago, that there should be a separation of churches and state. There's too many varieties of religious beliefs, and you don't want to do it. I mean, sometimes there's abuse of even that principle, but no, basically most Americans would say, yeah, the churches shouldn't be running the state and vice versa, but it is something that we should apply that principle more boldly to just about everything. The government shouldn't be there to run our lives or run the economy or police the world. The government should be there for the number one purpose of protecting our liberties, to allow us to assume our responsibilities and do what we can to solve these problems. I can guarantee you the world would be better off if they would accept that principle. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.